Don't forget to check out the main channel. A video on DmC Devil May Cry is coming out January the 15th. And also, if you like the reboot and you want to meet others, join the Discord. With all that out of the way, hello, ladies and gamers. I know I did technically cover the guns in my Ultimate Defense video, but I really do think that I should address it as its own thing. So you see, the discourse around DmC Devil May Cry's guns is much like my sex life. It has potential, but nothing ever happens. So today, I want to cover this in more depth, giving it the time of day it deserves. I will be repeating some of the stuff I've said in my core gameplay section in my Ultimate Defense video, but I'll do my best to sound different and still give a new perspective. So before we start, I think the discourse around DmC Devil May Cry's guns is extremely poor. Just like most discourse around this game, Treasure Treasure liked Kablooey, but called it useless.
Love the name, but damn is it useless. You shoot explosive darts into enemies and detonate them whenever you want to. It's not quick or practical enough for my liking.
Sphere Hunter mentioned it by saying,
pretty good for setting up larger charging enemies in trap combos. And that's all I have to say about the guns. They're really not as eventful as your melee attacks.
And Angry Joe says,
firearms are the weakest they've ever been. Pretty much making Ebony and Ivory, you know, those badass guns, a thing of the past.
I personally disagree with all their takes, but are guns in this game really problematic? Today, we get to the bottom of it. Part 1, Ebony and Ivory. Ebony and Ivory, to think that these guns aren't iconic is insane. First, I want to mention the design quickly. The design is pretty similar to the OG guns. The guns now have a curve, giving the edge of the guns a flare to it. Think of it as it strikes a balance between old and new. With that out of the way, we can cover it gameplay-wise. On the surface, OG and DmC Devil May Cry guns look the same, but there are key differences that separates them. One of them being the most major thing is how they shoot. In OG, they fire one bullet when you hit the button, while in DmC Devil May Cry, it's two. So shooting E and I now goes twice as fast. Now, I may say something a little bit controversial. Can you guess what it is, Ending Splinter? What? That's another video. I was going to say the high-level players don't need to shoot, you monkey brain. It's not... whatever. When you first play a DmC game, you use the guns for the more long-range advantage. I know that sounds bad, but stay with me. When you get to the point with a DmC game, you really focus on using it. Keep in mind, I'm not talking about Gunslinger yet. The guns tend to lock you in place, and it's a cheap way to hit the enemy without taking any skill or risk. So all that builds up to this. Straight shooting, just shooting the button, isn't that useful in the overall moveset. However, the creators of DmC Devil May Cry took a different way entirely. Now, holding the gun button gives you a new move. This is said for both Reverent and E and I. In past games, it would give you more damage, while in DmC Devil May Cry, they fundamentally changed the context. This is why charging in DmC Devil May Cry is for the most part better than older titles. Remember, I didn't say the guns are better or that Gunslinger is better, but the simple act of shooting is. The charge shot is similar to the spiral in DmC3. In DmC3, if you had Gunslinger equipped, Dante would shoot in the air and hit multiple enemies, bouncing off the walls and other enemies like a crackhead. Spiral wasn't a very good weapon, so this one move sticks out. In DmC3, it was called Trick Shot, so this move was applied to E and I. The difference being the two is that the ricochet doesn't bounce off the walls and can keep a solo enemy in the air for a short amount of time if there's only one enemy around. The next thing up is Rainstorm. I'll talk about Inverse in a second. Rainstorm in DmC Devil May Cry has been hated for a while, but in the end, I'll prove why this move isn't as problematic as it seems. The main issue is that most people bring up is that it's too slow, man. You see, DmC Devil May Cry is about crowd control and easy airtime. Put these two things together and you have the reason why it exists. In DmC Devil May Cry, you can hold multiple enemies in the air with Rainstorm, and you can hold them up and keep them there for longer. If your argument is, but in the older stop. That's exactly my point. In DmC Devil May Cry, the context of the gameplay, this is expectable because it fits what the game is trying to do. Previous Rainstorms didn't have this in mind, so that's why it's so different. I'd also like to add that Rainstorm can be used for quick aerial skill. Like if you see Nyx or Blue Rose play Dante, you'll see that they use this move often. Now, I'll get to talk about my favorite part about E and I. Inverse Rainstorm. The idea around this move is really simple. If Rainstorm just goes up to down, then Inverse Rainstorm goes down to up. This means you can keep multiple enemies in the air, and it takes you in the air while also being a gun move, and it has great tech. Woo! Sorry, Ending Splinter, my bad. Funny enough, I would, Ending Splinter, I would never do so. I think one of the key reasons why this move is so good is because we've never seen a move like this before in DmC. Sure, it sounds pretty broad, but the move is quite unique to DmC. Not only can you cancel it at any time, but you can use it to skip animations, making long moves in a short amount of time. It can also be used to use aerial moves on the ground. This in part is thanks to the evade. I think that it's a pretty amazing move that spices up the moveset. Part 2, Reverent. Reverent, much like E&I, is from the older games, but how they are used here will raise some eyebrows. The first thing up to mention is its design. It's a very basic design. It's pretty generic, however, much like Osiris and Arbiter, the design can be customized. You can make it gold, wooden, and even bone. Saying that, the real juice comes from its firepower. This can be used to stop the enemies in its place, halting movement altogether for a short amount of time, much like how it works in the older games. There are differences, mostly being the context around the gun. For instance, the harpies and the shards are hard to deal with E&I, but with Reverent it makes quick work of them. The other thing to mention is that it's not good at long range. But like I said, the guns really shouldn't be used for straightforward shooting. There are other pros as well. Unlike the OG guns, Reverent shot once and knocked the enemies up in the air. And my favorite, if you pin an enemy to the ground and then shoot, they'll launch into space. It's really fun. Now that we've mentioned that, there are two last things to talk about, that being the charge. When holding for Reverent, the weapon, you'll be able to shoot a bomb with a timed explosion. This timed explosion can be used in multiple ways. This can be used for keeping the enemy in the air, for damage, or to finish off the enemy. This can also be used on walls. This explosion really isn't something the shotgun has been known to do before, but this could be found in Nira's Blue Rose. So while it fulfills the role of a shotgun, but is also a successor to the Blue Rose. The final thing to go over is its gunslinger moves. Much like the OG gun, the Reverent doesn't fail to achieve its goal. Reverent has a move called Fireworks. Much like the older games, is to back off enemies around you. This can also be used if you have a charged gun. For whatever reason the normal shoot doesn't work for you, you have a move to fall back on. This can also be used for keeping enemies in the air. Not many use it for that reason, but it's a reason nonetheless. Alright, nearly there. Part 3, Kablooey. Kablooey is a weapon that was inspired by Lucifer in DmC4. In DmC4, you could attach pins to the enemies and then when trigger it, blow up. Kablooey takes the same idea but makes it more streamlined. Now you can use the gun button to shoot an enemy. Then you use the special detonation to detonate the explosive. If it sounds like you've been here before, that's because that's also what Reverent does. So, what's the deal? I think the creators did this for a purpose. With now there being two methods of timed explosion, it can separate what you specifically want as a player. Kablooey is meant for quick explosions or a deadly amount of damage, while Reverent's bomb is somewhere in between the two. This gives the guns a clear sense of purpose. But I'll get back to that later. If you're smart and you know how to time it right, this gun rocks in every possible way in the right player's hands, who knows what they're doing, and it can be devastating. That being said, I can understand why a lot of players that pick up this gun for the first time and only have confusion. It's hard to find times to use it. Fair point, Ending Splinter. But Kablooey is a tough weapon to get a grip on. Even though I have 200 plus hours in this game, it's hard for me to implement it in my playstyle. Part 4. The guns are more important than you think. Alright, all that build up to get to this. E&I are great guns. They have elements of the past guns while still having some new tricks. It's easy to pick up and understand. Reverent is great as well, not only because it serves the purpose as a powerhouse, but also because it implements other moves that can be used in its kit. Kablooey, while being a hard weapon to use, has its pros if put into the right player's hands. Hard to understand, but not bad. I think that we can all agree once I lay out all my points that guns on their own have more worth. This brings me to the main argument I want you to remember about this video. The guns in DmC Devil May Cry are meant to be used as support weapons. E&I, Reverent, and Kablooey function a lot like Lucifer and other support weapons rather than strictly being for long-range use. So if you're still not with me, let's zoom out a little bit. Gunslinger in 3 was meant to have guns as a special part of the game. The guns acted as if they were meant to be their own playstyle, because much like the rest of 3, it was meant to customize how to play the game. The guns were a force to be reckoned with. Without Gunslinger, only half of them are useful. But over time, I think we've forgotten about this. Even 4 and 5, the guns have never really matched that level. In 3, there was a specific time and place of use for it. But now with the multiple styles of use and the lack of focus on firearms, it seems like all of that is just a distant dream. As some of you may say, what about Pandora and Faust? I know they exist, but for the sake of what we're going over, we'll leave that at the door for now. The last note I want to end on is the fact that gun canceling is a key part of the game. In fact, while doing research for my Ultimate Defense video, I came across an interview from Ronnie Tucker, who tells us just how important it is.
And with that, with building the combos up and certainly the versatility as well, that's a lot of in-depth stuff just off the tip of the iceberg. Is there any more below the surface with the option to maybe cancel moves on the fly to sort of transfer into other maneuvers?
Absolutely. I mean, jump cancelling is a really good example because this is something that sort of was born into the DmC series, and that's something we really wanted to keep. So all of the aerial attacks, for example, you can jump cancel all of those attacks. You can use gun cancels on the ground in some cases. The cancel windows for evades and jump are often different too, going into attacks and movement. So there is a lot of depth there that you can get into when you start understanding all the timings of all the moves.
So all this put together, I think the guns of DmC Devil May Cry are underrated, or better yet, are the glue to DmC Devil May Cry's overall combat system. It's the glue that is put in the middle between the Angel and Demon system. I hope that I've shown you the importance of DmC Devil May Cry's guns. While people may overlook it, the guns play a large part in Dante's support kit, but also a key to many new ideas for DmC. It's something that we haven't seen before and may never see again. This has been Splinter333, and the DmC community hates me.